Hey, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today I'm very pleased and honored to have with me as my guest Danielle Naftulin, who's a partner at Cooley. Danielle, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So Danielle, I usually like to start these by asking you why you went to law school in the first place.
Sure. Probably people have more academic answers than I do. When I was in high school, I can't remember if it was suggested to me or if it just sort of seemed interesting, but I had kind of two paths in mind. I thought maybe I'd be a therapist or maybe I'd be a lawyer. And in my head, lawyer was what I saw on TV, which since I grew up in the 80s and 90s was like LA law.
Of course.
I actually worked at like a helpline to sort of see if maybe the therapist thing would be good for me, and I found that it was far too emotional for me. I couldn't leave it. I couldn't leave it there when I would leave. So I thought, oh well, maybe that's not a great career path. So I've sort of pivoted and just decided I'm going to go to law school.
Wow.
Candidly, didn't do a lot of homework. Didn't really like dig beyond that. Just like, oh, I think I'd be good at this, and set my sails and went.
Well, did you like law school? How did you like it when you got there?
Well, I liked aspects of it, but I found out very quickly that my mental notion of like, being a litigator and what you know from pop culture and otherwise around being a lawyer, I actually wasn't particularly well suited to. It was much more adversarial, which is obvious when you sort of think about it at all.
Yeah.
But it's more adversarial than my general nature. I didn't love the style of research and writing that went in with, case briefing and the like, and thought, oh, wow, well, maybe I should, put a little more thought into this now that I'm here. And so I started looking more into the transactional side of things at that point.
And that's how you got to Cooley, or was there a
Yes.
was there a summer clerk in there somewhere that helped?
Right. So at the beginning of the second year of law school, when all the firms are doing their thing, I did the whole on-campus interview thing. Yeah. And I really, at that point, had sort of figured out that I wasn't sure I wanted to be a litigator, but I honestly didn't really know what it would mean to do something else. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it sounds very silly to say now, but the internet wasn't the internet of today. A website was kind of like a landing page with maybe some contact information and not a lot else. So we had an actual like paper book with essays about the different law firms and the NALP form. That had like demographic information, and that was kind of it. Career services was really geared much more towards going into litigation. So it was a little bit of playing hide and seek. It felt like I was like, look over here and see if I find something. I had, good grades and was doing well in school. And so I had a lot of opportunities, which was really nice. Fall of 98 was a good time to be interviewing for jobs.
Yes.
And so I kind of, honestly, a lot by gut feel, worked my way through the interview process with different firms and sort of just try to get a sense of like, what would I be doing? Who would I be doing it with? And I really, having grown up in Southern California, really wanted to stay in California, but I wasn't married to LA. So I really looked in both the LA area and in the Bay Area. And ultimately decided to be a summer associate here at Cooley. So I did that in the summer of 99 and never looked back.
Well, you couldn't have picked a better time to join than the summer of 99. Oh my goodness.
Well, a little interesting though, because as a summer associate, it was like the height of the boom, right? Yeah. And then this, the market kind of decided otherwise in spring of 2000, March, and I graduated in May. And so I came up to Silicon Valley to start my career in emerging companies and venture capital and tech right after everything kind of fell apart. So it was a very interesting time to start. It was a great time to have gotten a job. But yes, it was an interesting time frame.
Well, you survived that crash, obviously.
Sure did.
So how was your practice? What was your practice like? How has it evolved? What is it today?
Mm-hmm. It's actually all sort of interrelated to everything we've actually already talked to. As you've heard, I sort of just decided I was going to law school and then, marched my way through undergrad with my sights on picking a major that I would enjoy, but that would help me get into law school. And so I was a history major, lots of reading and writing and analysis, did law school, et cetera, and then came here. Well, as I said, by the time I started, things had really dramatically turned, right? There was not a lot going on. And that downturn, obviously there's been others since, including the one we're currently sitting in. But that one was really focused on the industries that we serve very specifically. And so it was pretty not awesome. And so as a very junior associate with literally no background in anything, right? I was a history major. I didn't have a science background or a technology background, which is why I had sort of mentioned that as part of the backdrop. And the confluence of that and not having tons of work available, really work on whatever was available. I mean, they could have asked me to do just about anything. I'd be like, sure. And so what was available at the time ended up largely, and not surprisingly, being really kind of complicated and ugly financings and not such better looking M&A. That's really what I cut my teeth on and learned on. And I didn't have a particular industry focus, again, because I didn't have any real academic background that would make that reasonable. And because in light of the economic times, it would have been foolish to be like, well, I'm only going to do this kind of thing. So it was a very like cross industry, whatever we were working on, but lots and lots of these just sort of ugly deals. And for better or for worse, built up, a bit of an expertise in like the complicated transactions of that nature. And so then as things, evolved and got better over time, that's still where my skills were, right? I'd been working almost exclusively with private companies on, their day-to-day work. Some new companies were formed. The financings, the more complicated, the better, and sales. And so while things started to pick up and turn around, that's where I had really learned to do things. And so it made for me the most sense to kind of double down on doing more and more of that. I'm sure some people would say like, oh, well, you could have poked your head up and pivoted to something else, but I liked it and it was interesting and it was plentiful, right? Once things got better in the Valley, there were lots of companies to form and lots of financings that were a lot less ugly, exits that were good. Right. And so I just kind of kept moving in that direction, but I kept that broad industry focus or lack of focus, I guess is a better way of framing it, because it's fun, right? It's interesting to work on biotech and tech. And then all of the various permutations underneath. And for the securities work that I do and the kind of corporate like underpinnings, right? It's much more under the hood, right? And so the fact that I didn't have a scientific or technology background wasn't a hindrance and made it, and the pieces under the hood are all, the same, right? You look, at the guts of the corporate side of a biotech company, and it doesn't really look different from a technology company. And so for me, it was partially like, this is what I've done and what I know. And my network was sort of then across different industries. And it's fun and interesting to get to do all of them.
So is your mix now a mix of private and public companies, or you focus more
almost exclusively private, right? So what we at Cooley do is, well, people can take things in any number of directions, but we have people like me who focus primarily on the private side of the house. And then we've got a whole bunch of people who focus primarily on the public side of the house. So for clients of mine that go public, I am, leading and actively part of that process, but I bring in somebody who only does capital markets and public company work. Team needs to be bigger anyhow to get it done. They work with me throughout the process and the rest of the team, right? They're sort of intaking by osmosis through the process, all of the institutional knowledge and building a relationship, et cetera. And then once the company is public, they're sort of fully embedded in the team and sort of do the public company work after, and I go back and start new companies.
And so what is your mix right now? You said you work with a broad range of technologies. Give me a little feel for some of the kinds of
I have, hardcore biotech. I've got drug development companies. I've got digital health companies in, mental health and other spaces. I have consumer internet products. I have a couple of marketplace companies. It's really all over.
Yeah.
So most of it, well, almost all of it is referral based. So it depends. I have a really interesting healthcare company that I'm working with. That's brand new startup, but it was referred to me from a marketplace company where the founders know each other and what have you.
Well, it sounds like you really stumbled. I don't know if I should use the word stumble. It
Well,
sounds like you really
I
stumbled into
stumbled.
a career that really suited you so well. I mean, given that you weren't planning on it, and you just kind of just decided to go to law school without that in mind. I mean, it seems like it's really worked out well. Do you ever think about your fortuitous luck in that regard?
I think about it all the time, actually. I feel really, really lucky that I truly, I tell people, like, I kind of tripped into it backwards, and people ask these questions. We interview students every fall for, new summer associate positions, and every single one of them wants to know, like, did you always know you wanted to do this? And I'm always like, no, I didn't know. I didn't even know what it was. Right. But also this, again, sort of kind of like my comment about the internet. I mean, in the late 90s, people in the ecosystem knew what this was, but it wasn't part of the common vernacular, right? It wasn't like you had startup CEOs testifying in front of Congress, and it was a whole different world, and people really, at least in the spheres that I was in, like, had never heard of it, didn't know what it was. People thought I was going into adventure capital. It's like, well, kind of, but no. And so it was very much a lucky break in a lot of ways. But a lot of that for me just had to do with really Cooley, and the people we work with were interesting and engaging and great colleagues and mentors and all of that, which, who knows, if I'd stumbled into the same group of people doing something different, I might have liked that too.
Yeah, sure. Now, I know lawyers, and obviously I was a practicing lawyer myself. Obviously, there's always tons of opportunities to go in-house and join exciting companies. Was that something that ever tempted you, or would it ever tempt you in the future? Or
I think very few people do what I do for more than 2 decades and never think, maybe I should do something else.
Yeah, of course.
So it's crossed my mind. But I always come back to no, it's not really for me, for a number of reasons. One, again, it'd be hard for me to imagine working with a better group of people than I do. And that's a lot of our day, right? The clients are great and interesting, which you can, there are lots of places where that might be the case. But the team is really special. I like the depth and breadth of what we get to do, both, and also the ability to focus, which may sound totally contradictory, but like, I get to do what I like to do. I don't stray into practice areas that are not as interesting to me, or maybe not as, areas where I don't have the experience, or et cetera, in ways that I like I like partnering with my colleagues in other practice areas, et cetera. I really like the private company stuff. Really, really like it. But I also love the investor side work. And so for me, the perfect in-house position would have been in-house at a fund or in-house at a private company. But in either of those cases, I'm giving up half of what I do in a way. And so, and there are all kinds of other factors, including, I like the autonomy that I have, in what I do and whatever. So there's kind of lots of times where you sort of like poke your head up and think about life and think about, what else would I do? And it's never actually led me to seriously consider anything else in the law.
Makes sense. Do you ever think about the fact that, I mean, as lawyer, you're playing therapist all the time to your clients, and therefore you get to do actually, a little bit of the other 100%. You had, you get to play that on TV, so to speak, 30%.
Exactly.
You're an unlicensed therapist, right?
Right. In much lower stakes scenarios, right? I mean, it's like, it's big stakes for the company, but it's not like, your health and wellness necessarily, hopefully. No, it's certainly something that I'm aware of. It's actually something we talk about and like half joke about as practitioners, that 90% of your time is kind of armchair psychology, right? Because helping people think through the issues that they're facing in a particular circumstance, a bunch of that is the psychology of it. And so yes.
Asking the right questions, those are things therapists do. So
and helping people, take that step back and look at things in a different way. And so I never got any formal training there, but I do sort of think about that and think like, oh, in a way, it's a little bit of that.
Well, Danielle, it's been wonderful chatting with you. I love hearing about your career. I love hearing how those two things kind of intertwined into a career that's so satisfying. I can totally tell that you love what you do. I do a lot of these interviews, and I can tell right away when somebody really loves what they do. If you, of course, do decide to do something else, please come back and tell me about it.
For sure. Thanks so much for having me. It's been fun chatting with you.
This is Richard Hsu and Danielle Naftulin.
Thank you.